Hey guys, what's up? So it's been a while since I did any sort of magic update and things like that. I've been kind of busy. I got back from Japan a couple of weeks ago, and yeah, I want to do I guess a deck update, a small tournament report, and maybe some stuff I saw in Japan. And yeah, just some talking points here and there. So yeah, let's talk about Japan first. So I went to Japan for about a week and a half or so, and I did a lot of shopping. Tried looking for some magic cards at Haruya and a bunch of shops in Akihabara and things like that. Unfortunately, I didn't really see anything I really wanted in terms of magic. A lot of the cards there were actually more expensive to buy, even though the yen was weaker. The yen was, I think, zero point 0.7 to 1 US dollar, and I thought I'd be able to find some deals, maybe some like you know hole in the wall sort of shop to get some good deals. And while some cards were cheaper, a lot of obviously the Japanese cards were cheaper. Um, the English cards, their English versions weren't, and I was honestly looking for English versions. I thought the English cards would be cheaper in Japan, but the only cards I found that were maybe cheaper in Japan were some of the reserve list cards like dual lands and like Gaia's Cradle, stuff like that, which I wasn't really too interested in buying because I mean they're only really used for EDH, and I don't really play Legacy, so um, yeah, you can find Legacy cards, but I wanted to look for more modern cards. But unfortunately, the modern cards I think were just a little bit overpriced for English version. The Japanese cards were, I think, at market rate or a little bit below market rate. It's after you factor in the weaker yen, and I think some shops did do the 10% vax tax refund if you were a foreigner. Um, Unfortunately, just those shops I didn't really find anything I wanted. So I ended up not picking up much Magic cards there, and I didn't get to really play in Japan too. My schedule in Japan was kind of tight, and a lot of random stuff kind of happened, so it didn't really plan out. So I couldn't really get to play any modern Magic in Japan. Would have liked to. Maybe next time. I plan on probably going back there, maybe during spring, or same time around next year maybe. But yeah, so that was kind of like my Japanese Japan trip. I did find more Yu-Gi-Oh cards. I ended up buying more Yu-Gi-Oh cards than I did Magic cards, and it's same thing with Yu-Gi-Oh. Like some of the cards weren't that cheap. Some of the harder stuff, like I want English stuff that wasn't Asian English, because you have to make sure you check the back for that. But without digressing too much, I bought a couple of cards, nothing too crazy there. Um, some promotional cards and stuff like that. Yeah, and I did go to a modern event on Monday. It was my first event in like over a month, I think, at this point. And I did okay. I did 2-1-1, so I had two wins, one draw, and one loss. Um, and I think I should have had three wins, one loss. The game with the draw, I definitely just misplayed, and just time kind of ran out, and nothing really happened there. But um, quickly talking about it, I played against first round. I played against um, let me think about it. I think it was yeah. First round was against Murktide, and that's where I had my first draw. In game three, I had Chalice on one, but I was being really greedy with my fetch lands, and I wasn't fetching into my basics. I was trying to fetch a basic basic plains, but all of my fetch lands, none of them were fetching white, or could fetch a basic plane. I could have fetched an island, but I was like YOLO. Maybe I can mind game it and not fetch any basics, and maybe my opponent won't play Blood Moon. But he just went for it. He just YOLO the Blood Moon, and so he was stuck on. He couldn't play against Chalice, and I couldn't play against Blood Moon because I didn't have any basics. So that's how game three ended. It just ended in a draw. But I think it was just my fault for not fetching one basic island. But yeah, and then I played against Eldrazi Temple, 2-1 that one, and then game three I played against kind of like an Indomitable Creativity, but not really. It's like a persist combo deck that persisted back um, Titan, Ambient Titan, and it persisted back Archon of Cruelty, which was an interesting deck to see in action. And at first, I was just playing wrong against it because I was thinking it was Indomitable, but it ended up being that interesting combo deck. So I ended up doing 1-2 against it. I ended up losing to that particular deck. My experience was that the creatures weren't the problem. It was Ren in 6. Game 1, he went first and was able to drop Ren on turn 2. Couldn't really do anything about that. And then game 2, I went first, stopped all of his stuff. Game 3, he goes first. I had the mulligan. And then he once again goes turn 2 Ren. Like turn 2 Ren is just so hard to beat as a control deck. It's kind of crazy how much value it generates in a couple of turns. The first turn it comes down, it already replaces itself by grabbing you back a land, so it already fixes your mana right there. And then, yeah, it's just kind of hard to get rid of after a while if you just leave it alone. Eventually, he was just grabbing back Boseijus and stuff like that, and that was just kind of messy. Game 2, he did try to drop Ren again, so like all 3 game he had the Ren in 6, but I think game 2 I subtlety the Ren in 6 back to the top of his deck. He tries to play it again, I countered it, and basically just kind of stun locked him there. He couldn't develop his land and lost from there. So, lesson learned, or just, if you ever do play against a green-red deck and they're playing Ren in 6 and you're playing control, you just try to kill Ren in 6 as soon as possible. That card just spells nothing but trouble. Against aggro decks where you're playing like Ledger Shredder, Darcy, Monkey, like you have enough ways to out the Ren just through attacking and putting pressure. Where like against control deck, if you just don't counter the Ren or you leave Ren on the board and without answering it through Prismatic Ending or Leyline Binding or something like that, it just generates so much advantage through land, and it allows like combo decks and grindy decks to kind of fix their mana base and combo off later in the game, or just have a consistent game plan without stumbling. So you really want them to stumble, because those typical decks have greedy mana bases. They have like really awkward draws and stuff like that, and Ren and 6 kind of helps alleviate that consistency issue. So just by them dropping Ren and 6 on you, they increase their deck consistency a lot, and especially nowadays when Yorion is banned. Their deck is 60 cards now, so they're gonna see Ren and 6 a lot more. They're gonna see more consistent early game plans, especially if they're playing Fable Passage, and discarding cards and looting. And they're also playing that new, I'm not sure if it's a new enchantment, but it's a red enchantment that you drop down, and then you discard a card, draw 2 cards, and you sacrifice it, pay 1 colorless, and then gives your creatures haste. I think that red enchantment was the one that kind of caught me off guard too. I wasn't too sure what it was doing with it, but giving Amulet Titan haste plus, or giving Archon of Cruelty haste spells doom for you, or it gives the Fable Passage Hikijiki haste, which was like really interesting too. So when the moment they flip Hikijiki over and they have like a creature that they can copy, they pop that and copy it with the Hikijiki. That spells trouble. So it was an interesting combo deck, definitely something I wasn't too familiar playing against, but that's something else you gotta look out for. Against, I guess. And then game 4, my opponent was already like I think 0-2 or something like that. So he just gave me the win, and we didn't even play it out. So I just got the winnings and left there. So that was my first time back in about a month. So hopefully get a little bit more practice in. I'm a little out of practice right now. My deck did change a little bit, not too much. I like the deck where it is right now. It's pretty good against like everything I've played against I felt good against, except for creative abdominal type of decks. Namely because those decks I have trouble dealing with Ren and 6 and like Veil of Summers. Like those 2 green cards is just hard to deal with, and as a control player you'll know why. But against every other like mid-range deck, any other combo decks, anything else that's tier in the meta, I've done pretty well against. I do really well against Hammer Time. Like that's one of my favorite matchups. I mean, yeah, you risk dying in like turn two, but I think with my deck build right now, it's pretty good. Maybe struggle against Affinity more. If they go really wide with Affinity, I think Affinity is a bit more of a problem than Hammer Time is. Uh, Outside of that, yeah, like I said, I had a good matchup against Murktide, good matchup against Grixis Shadow. Whatever else is popular right now, I can't really list it top of my head. Companion wise, I see a lot more decrease in companion usage, obviously with the banning of Urian. You have the Walrus looking thing, but that guy's not really played too much. He's kind of gimmicky. And Kahira, not really. No one plays control, so Kahira doesn't really see much play either. A lot of control decks have kind of more or less moved away from Kahira, maybe. Um, you could still play Kahira in a blue-white control, but a lot of control decks have moved on to Jeskai colors. Um, if not, like some sort of four-color deck or a splash of fifth, especially for ley lines. So, but I'm still kind of sticking with the Esper colors, but um, that may change in the future. But I still want my black in my deck, so uh, I don't think I'll change my deck too much more in the future. But anyways, let's talk about it. The good, the bad, some of the minor updates, and just show you what I'm playing right now. Yeah, so still playing four prismatic ending, still your primary uh, modes of removal in the deck for cheap. This deck does have the ability to cast it for 5 if you need to, but you generally cast this for 1, 2, and maybe 3 sometimes. Your permanent way of removal. Leyline Binding is great, but Leyline Binding is not permanent, so if they have a way out Leyline Binding with, say, like a Boseiju, you're you might be in a bit of a um, bad spot, I guess. Or if they like to ferry it back or something like that. But Prismatic Ending is still a very fantastic card. Now, obviously, at sorcery speed, you can only remove stuff on your turn if you have the Teferi. Plus, Prismatic Ending is generally pretty good. Yeah. Still liking the 4 ops. Still my favorite cantrip in the deck. Still works really well with the Snapcaster build. If you're not playing Snapcaster, then you don't need to play op. Or if you're playing main deck Chalice, then don't play op. That's really it. I don't main deck Chalice. I always liked it in the side. And then my board wipes. Board wipes have definitely not been that great usage lately. I've actually been using Dam in the regular mode rather than overloading it most of the time. I don't ever overload it if I'm just getting overrun, but for the most part, I've been selectively using the single target a lot more than I have been using the overload. So that's why I'm playing that over Supreme Verdict. But yeah, still 3 Snapcaster. Still like the 3 snaps. Great value engine for later in the game. And there's a couple of times I just flash him in to just block a Ragavan. Still a decent removal. Or you flash him in and block Turok. Sometimes people drop Turok on turn 2, thinking that there's no way for this deck to remove it. It's like, oh well, I snap and Snapcaster, kill the Turok. Or there's plenty of other ways to remove Turok if you do run into it. 4 counterspell, namesake of the control deck counterspell. Definitely could be in a better position. I think counterspell right now is kind of not that great. In terms of like just being a control player, because there's just a lot more stuff that you need to counter, and counterspell sometimes it just doesn't pull it off. Or there's ways to play around counterspells. You still gotta play around Caverns of Souls and Veil of Summers, which a lot of green decks always side in against a blue-white control deck. Or there's just not really crazy value stuff to counter, like if they're playing like a 1/1 Land of War Elf or a Mana Dork, you don't really want to counter it, but this, I don't know. Counterspell definitely doesn't feel as strong as it used to, and there's times where I side out one, or even against certain decks I side out all 3 or all 4 copy. Against like Eldrazi Temple, I side out all 4 of them, because they were playing Caverns. And I just game 1 I had like 3 of these in my hand. I just couldn't do anything. There was nothing to counter, so that when they had Caverns of Souls out, so I just game 2 and 3, I just took out all my counter spells and put in creature removal. And then now I'm playing one Kai's Guile. I managed to cut one to play a fourth Leyline Binding because I wanted to try it out. And I haven't really noticed a difference. A lot of decks nowadays don't use the graveyard as much, so um, Kaya's hasn't been as strong lately, but still great, still good in certain matchups. Certain matchups I still like side in all, 4 copies of it, or I guess 3 copies because I have 2 in my side deck, and that works out really well especially against decks that aren't prepared to fight against Kai's Guile. Um, they lose hard to it, especially when you can catch them. Uh, Definitely Archmage still one of the best cards, most versatile card in the deck, and works really well with Snapcaster. Especially against Murktide, I just keep stealing their stuff. I steal Darcy most of the time. Ragavan, if they leave it on the board, if they dash in Ragavan, you never want to try to take control because Ragavan does return to their hand as a delayed effect. So don't do that. Yeah, not much to say about Archmage Charm. Kind of like a staple of the modern blue-white control deck. 3 Teferis, still a relevant planeswalker, still pretty strong. Not as strong as Ren and 6 though, I think. But it still helps keep certain things in check. But he does feel a little bit slower. There's a lot of like 1 to 2 mana threats that come out on the board really early, turn 1, turn 2, and then by the time he comes out on turn 3, he can only usually answer one thing and then die immediately. It's great if you can stick him on the board and your opponent can't remove him, then that's when you kind of win the game and snowball. But at sometimes when they have like too many threats on the board, he just doesn't do anything. Doesn't do enough at 3 mana. And that's why I'm playing 3 copies. I didn't want to play 4 because it would just clog up your hands. There's times where you have multiple copies in your hand and you just can't do anything with it. So I think 3 copies is pretty decent. Side a 4th copy in case you play against a Cascade deck or something like that. Otherwise, I think 3 copy in the main is decent enough. Or even 2 copies. You can come down to 2 if you want to, and leave play more instant speed interaction instead. 1 Jace, still like him as a win condition, and yeah, he helped me win 2 games. He helped me win against a Murktide game. Game 1, he helped me win against Eldrazi Temple. Against Eldrazi Temple, I just started Fate Sealing because I had like 4 or 5 cards in my hand. I didn't even bother. I was able to reduce my opponent's hand to 0, just by trading a lot of resources and stuff. So by the time when he got his hand to 0, I started to Fate Seal him. So that basically ended the game there. I Fate Seal him 1 turn. Saw that he had 4 lands on board, and then Fate Seal him to see that he was going to draw in their Eldrazi Temple. I just let him have it. So that after he drew it, and he scooped the game. So yeah, Wandering Emperor I still like, but definitely not as strong of a card compared to like something like a Solitude. So you can even cut her to 1, or not even play her at all, and maybe play 2 Jace instead. I still like her. Still a great way to win games, because she can start pumping out a bunch of tokens and you can go wide in this particular deck. And that's how I like to kind of win my games, is just to go wide when I can successfully resolve her and start producing tokens. Yes, sometimes I will use her as removal, but the main thing you want to do with her is to be aggro when you do get her out and play her. But yeah, her and Jace can be a win condition, or I guess the 5 mana Teferi. Still playing just 2. For 2 for redundancy. I don't want to play 3 because then you might just draw like too many in your opening hand, and that just doesn't feel too good. But yeah, definitely 2. And I do cut him out sometimes. If I'm playing against a matchup that's really fast, I will cut him down to 1 and just side him out. So against like maybe a Murktide or something where I feel like I'm not gonna be able to resolve him on turn 5, or they might have like a Spell Pierce or something like that, or if I draw too many of him, I might just my deck might just cave in. Then I'll definitely take out 1 copy. Against most other matchups, I do just keep it in 2 as my primary win condition. So yeah, and then 2 Solitudes, definitely can bump this to 3. Maybe I don't think I would ever play 4 copies. If I do play 4 copies, then I'm definitely going to play Kahira. But I don't want to really play Kahira, so I'm still sticking to 2. Most of the time, 90% of the time, I hard cast this card. I don't really ever invoke it unless there's a situation where I really need to invoke it. But yeah, I think 2 has been working out okay. Maybe 3 might be better. And finally, the last card in my deck here is the 4 Leyline Binding. Very good card. Does make your mana base a little awkward, a little bit more greedier, a little bit more susceptible to Blood Moon. So just be careful when you're playing against a deck that can play Blood Moon, like Scarm and or Scam. Scam and Murktides. So yeah, so I've liked it. I think 3 is a good number. I don't know about 4. Like I did draw this a lot, and it did help me win a bunch of games. But at the same time, there were times where if I didn't have fetch lands, it was kind of really expensive to cast. But most of the time, if I drew this plus Prismatic Ending, I was in a good spot. So in the early turns of the game, I can just Prismatic Ending, and then later I can just start like Leyline Binding. The only weakness I found with this card is it does lose to stuff like the green hate, like Boseiju and the what you call it, the 4 mana green card that blows up two enchantments, Fervor. I'm at a loss of the card name right now. But yeah. So there's occasions where Leyline isn't as great as like permanent removal, like Solitude or Prismatic Ending, but it has its usage, especially when you're able to turn it on for 1 mana. It becomes really good. If you have to spend 2 to 3 mana, it's at rate, I would say. If you have to spend like 4 to 5 or 6 mana, then obviously it's terrible. But yeah, definitely you want to try to get it to spend about 3 mana. 3 to 2 mana is like the best cost for the card, and then at 1 mana is like perfect, but you don't always get there. Alright, let's talk about the mana base really quickly. I did change 1 card on my mana base, and yeah, it's been working okay. Yeah, first off, Manland, Hall of Storm Giant, and Celestial Colonnade. I like both. There's times where I can activate this one and still have mana up for a counterspell, or if I'm just going for damage, Hall's good. So they both have their usage, and I definitely recommend at least playing 1 or 2 Manlands. It could be 2 Celestial Colonnades, it could be 2 Hall of Storm Giants. Whatever you feel that's good. I definitely recommend this. I would use this more than I would ever use a Castle Vantress or Castle Arundel or any of the other castle cards. I just like having this type of mana or Manlands to close out the game rather than to scry through my deck. Because yeah, in modern in competitive play, you have to be careful about how much time you're spending per match. If you want to finish up the game quickly, you don't want to just keep delaying it, and you'll lose the time, especially as a control player. Anyways, for mana base here, continuing on, 4 Flooded Strand. 4 Flooded is a must in the deck. Like it's the best fetch land you can play in this particular archetype, because it fetches you the basic island and basic plains, which you need when you're playing against Blood Moon type decks, and it can fetch every land in your deck too. So yeah, definitely 4 Flooded, no questions there. Now this right here, I tried to change it up a little bit, but not really too much. So I'm doing 4 Polluted Deltas, because that's how my original deck was built. It was built on 4 Polluted Delta, and then 1 Scarring Tarn. Ideally, you don't want to be playing 4 of this. It could be like something like this, or imagine you cut 2 Polluted Delta for 2 Misty Forests, or cut 2 Polluted Delta for like 2. It could be any combination of that, because you want your fetch lands to kind of vary in some sense, because it makes you less susceptible to 2 things. You won't lose a Pithing Needle if for some reason they Pithing Needle and call Polluted Delta, or you might lose to what's the card? um, surgical extraction. There you go. If you're playing against a mill deck, but mill deck hasn't been really that popular, so I'm not really too worried about mill. But pithing needle is something that you still will face against, especially against like hammer decks or decks that play Urza Saga. They definitely will fetch or search on the third trigger of Saga to get like a pithing needle, and then if you have like deltas on the board and you don't crack them in response, then you're just gonna get locked out. So do be careful about that. Optimally, you want to play 9 fetches because you are doing 4 ley lines. You want to be able to get your name lands onto the board as soon as possible and start reducing the cost of ley line binding as soon as possible. I think 9 fetch lands is probably the way to go. I don't know about 10s. I see some people play 10. I think 10 is too much. I think 9 is a good number, and I recommend, if you can, just try to like break it up the other sets, because I'm not playing any swamps in the deck, so Pluto Delta is not as necessary anymore. When I used to play swamp in the actual deck, Pluto Delta was better because I was able to fetch a swamp in response to like a Blood Moon. But nowadays, it could be a like whatever blue source you want, or it could be a white source, a white fetcher. You could also play like a wooded. Sorry, let me think about what the card name was. Can't remember the other white fetch land here. Let me go to my login real quick. So I'll give some recommendations. Yeah, so you can also get. Misty Forest is like one of the cards you can play. So I recommend 2 Misty Forest, or 2 Scarred and 1 Misty. The other fetch land you can play is the. Sorry, it's not even on my list. The other 2 fetch lands that fetch white. In case you play against Blood Moon, you have like a 5th option to fetch out your planes. Because you have 4 flooded right here. And then you can also get the blue, the Orzhov one, or the blue green one, or the red white one. I don't remember those fetches, but I own them. I just totally forgot their name right now. But anyways, yeah. So the total 9 fetches is what I think is the bare minimum for this type of deck. And then just kind of go from there. So I'm playing 24 lands. My fetchable lands are, I think, 11 fetchable lands. So I'm playing 9/11. So no relations to the 9/11 event, but yeah, I'm playing these right here. So these are my fetchable targets. Hopefully they show up on camera. So I got the Esper land, Bant land, and then I have blue white, and then a Steam Vents, and Watery Graves, and then obviously plains. So yeah, just 4 basics. You don't really need that much more. You could play a 5th basics. I would recommend another plains if you're afraid of Blood Moon. Yeah, 2 fountains is pretty decent, and then 2 wateries been pretty good. Steam Vents. So when you have all 3 of these out on the board, or at least something like this, then that means you have your ley line now costs 1 mana. So that's what you're trying to go for by turn like 3, maybe. Turn 2, you can definitely get it to 2 mana. It's just these 2 alone. Or these 2 alone right here, or something like, a combination of this will get your ley line binding down to 2 mana, which is good enough. You don't always need to get your ley line binding down to 1 mana by turn 2. Turn 2, 2 mana ley line binding is good enough. So that's what all the fetches are for. But yeah, I think that's the way to go. You could, in theory, go like play another one that goes like a tri-land, and then play another tri-land that gives you 2 offset colors, like blue, green, black. That tri-land instead. I just didn't like that because it didn't give me white, and this deck sometimes needs a lot of white mana to work with. Obviously, blue is like every land in our deck gives us blue, is for Archmage Charm, but sometimes you need white mana and you need multiple copies of white. So I wanted to at least have my dual lands also give white if possible, or I guess I should say my tri lands. So yeah, 11 fetchable targets with 9 fetch lands. I think that's pretty decent. You're not always gonna see all your fetch lands. You're not always gonna see all your other lands, but I think that ratio gives you like a decent opportunity to be able to get what you need onto the board. And playing quite a few games, and that has been pretty much my experience. Is I'm able to get most of my colors out on the board by turn 3 that I would need. And lastly, just 2 Mystic Gates. Not much else to say there. I took out the Sunken Rune because I haven't really used it for its 2 black ability, 2 black mana that much. Plus the 4 fetch lands will, or the ninth fetch land, Scar and Tarn here, should get me my black mana if I need to dam for 2 black. But oftentimes I don't really need black anymore in the deck. It's primarily a blue-white control deck now, or so I'm using black rather than red. If you're playing red as your third color, then obviously you could be playing like fire and ice. But I haven't been a big fan of fire and ice as much. But maybe it'll change in the future. But for now, I still prefer having a bit of black mana in the deck for Dam and Kai's Guile. And then let's go over the side deck, and then yeah, we'll finish up here. So still 2 Chalice here. You can play a 3rd copy if you want to. If you do play Chalice in the main, and I would recommend playing 3 copies of Chalice in the main. I've always been just a believer that Chalice is a good side card. It's not great against every matchup, because not every deck is playing 0 mana or 0 mana cards. And then 1 mana is like, yeah, majority of decks do play 1 mana cards, so you can always Chalice for 1. But I still like playing my 1 mana card, which is like the Ops and the Snapcaster. That's always been like a classic combo, and I always like that sort of play style. And that's why I decided to side the Chalices over main decking them. And then my favorite go-to like card that kind of goes in against a lot of decks, as long as they're playing red or green, it's like always gonna be good, especially red. And this is like my best way to out Blood Moon. I can't name a better card to out Blood Moon than this and 1 Island. So yeah. And then 2 Hollow Moonlights. Yeah, just a good card to fight against Indomitable Creativity. You can play it against Living End, and yeah, basically any deck that tries to cheat out a creature, Breach Through the Breach, or Sneak Attack. I'm actually not sure if Sneak Attack. I think it's Through the Breach. Yeah, Through the Breach or something like that. Just anything that tries to cheat out stuff, you just Hollow Moonlight, and it's just like a good answer for that. And then 2 vetoes for the combo decks against the mirror match. I don't really play against the mirror match too much. Not too many blue-white control players in my meta. Maybe 1 or 2, but yeah, Dolmen Veto is still a really good counterspell there. And then 1 Temporary Lockdown. This card is surprisingly pretty good in certain matchups. Like certain matchups, I would bounce this back to my hand using Teferi and then just replay it again and then just relock everything. So it's kind of like a reusable board wipe, I guess, especially for like Hammer Time and stuff like that. Like once you slap this down, unless they have like Prismatic Ending or a Presage or a Ley Line or something like that, this card becomes like really hard to get rid of. And you can just keep bouncing it back with Teferi and replaying it, and kind of just board wipe when you need to. Obviously, if whatever's trapped under here, if it has an ETB effect, then it's gonna trigger once you bounce this back, because everything goes back onto the board. So just be careful of that. The only other card that you can seal under this, you can seal your own Chalice, or you can seal like your own Snapcaster. But it's been a decent board wipe for me, because killing creatures is not always gonna be the way to win the game. You also need to hit stuff like their hammer, their Sagara's aid, stuff like that. Like affinity, especially affinity, like they have a bunch of like steel leaf or like yeah steel leaf the leaf card. I totally forgot the name of it. And like a bunch of other like artifacts that um, need to be like removed or you're gonna lose sort of thing. So yeah, temporary lockdown is good for that um, aspect. And it's only 3 mana, so it's not like super expensive to play. I like Farewell, but Farewell is 6 mana, and Farewell I think it's just a little too slow for modern. It's great in Pioneer, but not so much in modern. I think I think temporary lockdown's a little bit better for modern. And then Teferi, fourth copy, great against mirror matches, stuff like that. There's certain decks that you want to get Teferi out as soon as possible, and that's when you play the fourth copy of Teferi. Two's Kaya, just to hit against graveyard decks, and you still see some graveyard shenanigans going around, and also kills indestructible creatures or it's creatures that have hexproof, stuff like that. It's like or has protection from white, like Turok. Like it's very versatile card, and that's why I still like having Kaya's Guild being played in my deck. And helps against burn deck. Sometimes you have a little bit of life gain. Help me win against Eldrazi Temple really well. Like every time they attacked or have one creature on the board, I can always just remove it with Kaya's Guild. Like they try to reality smasher, I'll just go Kaya's Guild, remove that. Stuff like that. So overall, it's just I still like the card. Just maybe not main deck anymore because graveyard is not that important. And finally, another really good card, Salty. Definitely recommend this card. It's a good win condition. It's a good way to kind of fate seal your opponent too, especially if you're ahead or even if you're playing behind. Sometimes it's just a free spell to cast. I actually invoke this card a lot more than I invoke Solitude. So Solitude is definitely one of those cards that will be really good against certain matchup, especially if they're playing Caverns of Souls. This card like it makes them commit to the play, and then you subtlety whatever they're trying to play, and puts you just ahead on board and stuff like that. A really good tempo play. But yeah, definitely two. I've always liked two. And yeah, that's basically it for my deck there. So not a whole bunch has changed, but I thought I'd give you guys an update on the deck and some ideas. Like I said, if you don't like black, then you should play Fire and Ice. I think it's the other way to go. If you don't like Snapcaster, then you can go for Solitude plus Kahira. If you don't like Leyline Binding, you can do a less greedier mana base. Play some other removal, but Leyline Binding has been a pretty good removal cards for most against most matchups. And the one thing it does for the deck is that it allows us to remove other planeswalkers for cheap or whatever, because blue white just has a terrible time dealing with planeswalker unless you have like Salty or something else. But yeah, that's what I like about Leyline Binding. It doesn't answer a turn 2 Ren though, unless you're playing the super greedy version and you're able to get Leyline Binding out for 1. Then I guess you can Leyline Binding Ren on turn 2. But yeah, it's not as good as Prismatic Ending in that sense, where you can answer it. But yeah, I'm playing 4 and 4 just to make sure I deal with Ren and 6, because that card is still ridiculously hard to deal with. I can take hits from Ragavan and still win the game, but if Ren and 6 resolves and I don't deal with it for a couple of turns, it becomes like a snowball effect. It like Ren and 6 to me snowballs harder than Ragavan does. And yeah, that's just the nature of the game. Like every time I play against a deck that has Ren and 6, it's just like, oh man, can I out this before they start snowballing me, or and obviously you don't really care for Ren and 6 ult. Like it's don't worry about that. It's more like if they just keep plussing and getting their land back and fixing their mana base, and it gets into the late game, then you're in trouble. But yeah, Ren and 6 is just one of those cards that I don't think it needs to be banned, but it is definitely a card that is pretty pushed and can swing games in the opponent's favor really quickly. Anyways, guys, that's all I got for you. If you got any comments and questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you guys next time.